Hello, friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring. And now, it is time to rest. As always, I will tell you a kind legend that once took place in our beloved Middle-earth. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin. The night air was cool and clear above Helm's Deep, the stars glimmering faintly over the ramparts of the Hornburg. The battle was over. Smoke rose from the fields below, mingling with the scent of trampled grass and blackened steel. The cries of the wounded had faded into the low murmur of men at rest, and the torches along the walls burned low, casting a weary light across the fortress stones. Legolas Greenleaf stood alone upon the battlements, his keen eyes scanning the dark valley beyond. He had fought through the long night beside Aragorn and Gimli, through thunder, rain, and the terrible onslaught of Saruman's hosts. Now, though the dawn had brought victory, his heart was not at peace. Far below, the river that wound past the deep shimmered in the moonlight. Something about its path drew his gaze. Tracks, faint and scattered, led away from the slaughter, and though most men would see only the signs of retreat, the elf perceived more. The footprints of orcs, smaller than those of the Uruk-hai who had stormed the walls, and among them, deeper marks, burdened steps, as if they carried something heavy. He turned as Gimli's boots clattered upon the stones. The dwarf looked up at him with a broad grin, his beard streaked with soot. "Well, Master Elf, the day is ours at last. Not even Saruman's filth could break the deeping wall. A fine victory, if I ever saw one." Legolas inclined his head slightly. "Aye, it was well fought. Yet victory sits ill with me tonight. Some of the enemy have fled, and not without purpose." Gimli's smile faded. "Fled? Bah! Let them run back to their masters with their tails between their legs. The Rohirrim will hunt them down soon enough." But Legolas did not move from the wall. His voice was low, almost troubled. "No, Gimli. Not these. Look there, upon the riverbank. See how their trail keeps to the shadows. They bear no standard, yet they move with haste and cunning, and there are few enough of them that they might go unnoticed, save by elven eyes." Gimli peered over the edge, squinting. "You've keener sight than I, Legolas. But if you say it, I'll believe it. What do you think they carry?" Legolas hesitated, his gaze narrowing on the dark horizon. "Something they deem worth dying for." The two descended to the courtyard, where Aragorn was speaking quietly with King Theoden. When Legolas approached, the man of Gondor turned to him, with his usual calm, though weariness lined his face. "What troubles you, Legolas?" Aragorn asked. "A band of orcs escaped the field," the elf replied. "They move north, toward the mountains. I fear they carry something stolen from your allies." Theoden frowned. "Stolen? From Rohan?" Legolas nodded gravely. "A map. I saw it among the plunder they carried as we fought upon the walls. A map marked with paths unknown to most men. I know those markings. They lead toward Lothlorien." Aragorn's expression darkened. "Then Saruman's treachery runs deep indeed. If the enemy learns the hidden ways through the mountains, he could strike at the lady's realm." "Aye," Legolas said softly. "The Golden Wood is dear to me, and I will not see it betrayed by the filth of Isengard." Theoden looked from one to the other, his brows furrowed. "You would pursue them, then?" "I would," said Legolas without hesitation. "But I will not delay the host of Rohan. A small company will move swifter than an army. If fortune favors us, we may overtake the orcs before they reach the gap of Rohan." Aragorn placed a hand upon his shoulder. "You will not go alone." But the elf shook his head. "You have your road, Aragorn, son of Arathorn. Yours leads east and mine north. Yet fear not. I will return, if fate allows it." The dwarf stepped forward, his eyes flashing. "And you'll not leave me behind, elf? I've had enough sitting idle while you chase shadows. If there's hunting to be done, count Gimli among your company." A faint smile touched Legolas's lips. "Then I am doubly blessed. I shall count your axe beside my bow." So it was that, before dawn, Legolas and Gimli rode out from Helm's Deep, accompanied by 3 riders of Rohan, young men, swift and steadfast, chosen by the king himself. The earth was still damp with rain as they followed the faint trail leading northward, through ravines and over broken hills. For 2 days they rode in silence, the wind carrying the scent of pine and the distant cry of hawks. The tracks grew harder to follow, for the orcs moved with cunning, masking their passage with branches and stones. Yet Legolas pressed on, his senses sharp as a blade. At last, on the 3rd evening, they reached the foothills of the White Mountains. The sun was setting behind the peaks, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. From a high ridge, Legolas halted and motioned for the others to be still. Below them, in a narrow valley, a fire flickered, faint but certain. Black shapes moved around it, hunched and restless. The elf's eyes gleamed. "There," he whispered. "The quarry is before us." Gimli gripped the haft of his axe. "Then let's end their mischief before they slip away again." But Legolas held up a hand. "Patience. We know not their strength, nor their purpose. Tonight we watch, and when dawn comes, we strike." The company settled into the shadows of the ridge, the cold wind sighing through the rocks. Far below, the orcs muttered among themselves, their tongues harsh and guttural. One voice rose above the rest, deep and commanding, marked by cruel authority. Legolas's heart grew still as he listened. The voice was not that of a common orc. It carried discipline, the tone of one bred for war. An Uruk, he thought grimly, and not of Mordor, but of Isengard. The hunt had only begun. The night deepened around the ridge, wrapping the hunters in a veil of cold shadow. The moon had not yet risen, and the only light came from the flickering fire below, where the orcs huddled close, muttering in their harsh tongue. The air smelled faintly of smoke and decay, the scent of creatures that loved the dark and shunned all fair things. Legolas crouched upon a rock, silent as the wind. His keen eyes watched every movement in the valley, the restless pacing of guards, the glint of crude blades, and the hunched figure seated apart from the rest, the one who spoke with authority. That was their leader. The Uruk was taller than the others, with a pale mark burned into his right arm, the white hand of Saruman, still gleaming faintly beneath the grime. So the White Wizard's designs had not perished with the ruin of Isengard, thought Legolas grimly. His servants still crept through the wilderness, driven by orders left unfinished. Gimli shifted beside him, his breath misting in the chill air. "That one looks uglier than most," he muttered. "A chieftain, perhaps?" "Aye," whispered Legolas, "and not without purpose. See how the others obey him. He bears the white hand, and his mission is not yet done." The dwarf frowned. "Then let us cut his mission short. A quick charge, and we might scatter them before they wake." But the elf shook his head. "They are too many, and the land favors them. The valley is narrow, the rocks steep. If we strike now, we risk being trapped below. Patience, my friend. We will wait for dawn. Their eyes will be weak, ours sharp." Gimli grumbled under his breath, but said no more. The Rohirrim scouts, young men untested in such stealthy hunts, crouched near the rocks, watching the enemy fires flicker in uneasy silence. Hours passed. The stars wheeled overhead, and the night wind grew colder. Once, an orc sentry climbed partway up the slope, sniffing the air. Legolas drew an arrow and waited, the bowstring taut, his breath steady. But the creature turned back, muttering, and the danger passed. At last, the first pale hint of dawn crept along the eastern rim of the world. The orcs had drawn close around their fire, gnawing on dried meat and muttering in low voices. The Uruk captain barked an order, and one of the lesser orcs brought forth a bundle wrapped in black cloth. Legolas's eyes narrowed. Within that cloth, the outline of something flat and square was visible, parchment or hide, bound tightly. The map. "So it is as I feared," he murmured. "What say you, Legolas?" asked one of the scouts quietly. "The map of Rohan's archives. They mean to take it east, perhaps to the servants of Mordor. If it reaches them, the hidden paths of the White Mountains will be known, and the Golden Wood lies within their reach." The young rider drew in a breath. "Then we must not fail." Legolas nodded once. "We strike when the sun breaks the ridge. Until then, ready yourselves." As the first golden rays spilled across the peaks, the hunters moved. Swift and silent, they descended the slope, keeping low among the rocks. Legolas glided ahead, bow in hand, his steps soundless as falling snow. Behind him came Gimli, crouched low, axe gleaming faintly in the dawn. When they were near enough that the orc's foul breath reached them, Legolas raised his hand. The company halted. He drew an arrow, the fletching whispering softly against the bowstring. The sun rose higher. A blinding flash of light spilled into the valley. The orcs snarled, shielding their eyes. "Now," said Legolas. His first arrow flew straight and true, striking the sentry through the throat. The creature fell without a sound. Gimli leapt forward with a roar, and the Rohirrim charged beside him, their swords flashing in the morning light. The camp erupted into chaos. The orcs stumbled to their feet, shrieking and cursing, but they were blinded by the sun and slow to take up arms. Legolas moved like a storm among them, each arrow finding its mark. Gimli's axe rose and fell with thunderous strokes, and the young riders fought bravely, forming a tight circle against the press of snarling foes. Yet even as the battle turned in their favor, the Uruk captain rose with a bellow. He towered over his kin, wielding a jagged blade and a shield marked with Saruman's white hand. With one sweeping blow, he sent a rider sprawling. His voice rang out above the din. "Isengard endures!" he roared. "You cannot stop what has begun!" Legolas loosed 2 arrows in quick succession. One glanced from the Uruk's armor, the other struck his shoulder. But the creature didn't fall. With a snarl, the Uruk seized the black bundle from the ground and turned to flee toward the shadowed pass beyond the valley. "After him!" cried Legolas. Gimli swung his axe clear and charged, but the Uruk moved swiftly, bounding over stones with inhuman strength. Legolas sprang after him, his feet barely touching the ground. The chase carried them through a narrow ravine where the light dimmed and the sound of battle faded behind. The Uruk, wounded but relentless, glanced back once, baring yellow teeth. "You'll not have it, elf!" he hissed, and vanished around a bend. Legolas quickened his pace, leaping over a fallen log. The ravine opened suddenly into a clearing where the ruins of an old watchtower stood, a remnant of Gondor's far western guard, long forgotten. Crumbling walls jutted from the hillside, and within them the Uruk turned to make his stand. Legolas nocked an arrow, breathing steadily. The Uruk laughed, the sound echoing harshly. "A fair hunt, elf, but your kind will fade, and the white hand will rise again." Before the creature could charge, Legolas released. The arrow struck deep into the Uruk's throat. The beast staggered, dropped the bundle, and fell to the dust. Silence filled the clearing, save for the whisper of wind through stone. Legolas stepped forward, kneeling beside the fallen foe. He unwrapped the black cloth, and there indeed lay the map of Rohan, drawn upon tanned hide, its ink glimmering faintly with runes of the Westfold. Yet something else caught his eye. Beneath the map was a second parchment, smaller, sealed with a crude sigil, a red eye sketched in dried blood. He frowned, sliding it carefully into his pouch. That seal did not belong to Saruman alone. There was another will at work, one that reached farther east, into the very heart of Mordor. Gimli came puffing up the ravine, blood on his beard and triumph in his eyes. "There you are! I thought you'd left me no orcs to cleave." Legolas smiled faintly. "This one I kept for myself, but his cargo was more troubling than I hoped." The dwarf eyed the parchment warily. "More trouble, eh?" "Aye," said the elf. "Much more." From far below, the cries of the remaining orcs faded into silence. The valley was theirs, but Legolas felt no joy. The map was safe, yet its presence and the secret parchment beneath whispered of darker designs. He looked eastward, where the mountains gave way to the endless plains beyond. Somewhere in that distance, the shadow of Mordor stirred. "The hunt is done," Gimli said, wiping his axe. "For now," murmured Legolas. "But this was no mere raid. The war is not finished. It has only changed its face." And as the wind sighed through the ruins of the forgotten tower, the elf of Mirkwood felt the first chill breath of a new darkness creeping over Middle-earth. They buried the fallen orcs in a shallow pit beyond the ruins, covering the bodies with stones so that beasts would not despoil them. None of the company spoke while they worked. The stench of battle lingered in the air, mingled with the faint scent of rain upon the wind. When it was done, Legolas turned his gaze to the east, where the sun was rising pale and thin through the morning haze. The Rohirrim scouts gathered near the ruined tower, their armor dented, their faces drawn with fatigue. They had fought bravely, yet they were young and unused to such grim hunts. One of them, Edric, son of Helluin, approached and bowed his head. "My lord Legolas," he said softly, "we have the map again. Will you return it to the king?" "In time," the elf replied. "But first, there is something that must be understood. These orcs did not flee by chance. They followed orders. The mark upon their leader's arm speaks of Isengard, yet this scroll bears the sign of the Eye." He drew the smaller parchment from his pouch and held it where the light touched it. The seal of dried blood gleamed faintly. Even Gimli took a step back, muttering under his breath. "That is no token to trifle with," said the dwarf. "Best burned, if you ask me." Legolas shook his head. "Not yet. There may be knowledge here that we cannot afford to lose." With careful fingers he broke the seal. Inside was a strip of rough parchment, scrawled in the black speech. Though the elf could not speak it aloud, he understood enough of its meaning to feel a chill pass through him. The message was brief, a command from some servant of the Dark Tower. "Bring the map to the mouth," he translated quietly, and with it, the promise of the White Wizard's allegiance. The words hung heavy in the still air. Gimli frowned deeply. "The mouth? What madness is this?" Legolas answered, his voice low. "There are whispers of a herald who speaks for the Dark Lord himself, one who walks abroad when his master cannot. If the orcs sought him, then Saruman's shadow stretches farther than we knew. Perhaps he sought to bargain his betrayal to Mordor before his fall." The dwarf spat into the dust. "Bah! Treachery piled upon treachery. There's no end to the deceit of wizards." The young rider Edric looked uneasy. "Then what are we to do now, my lord?" Legolas's gaze remained fixed upon the eastern sky. "We will not turn back yet. There may be more of Saruman's servants abroad, carrying word or weapons. We must learn how far this corruption spreads." So they rested only a short while. When the morning grew bright, they left the ruins and turned northeast along the slopes of the mountains. The land grew wilder there. Steep gullies and deep ravines cut by hidden streams. Pines clung to the rocky ridges, and hawks wheeled high above, their cries echoing faintly. They rode in silence for much of the day. The wind grew colder as they climbed higher, and thin mists curled around the cliffs. Once or twice, Legolas thought he saw movement far below, shadows slipping among the rocks. But when he looked closer, there was nothing. Still, unease followed them like a whisper. At midday they came upon an abandoned outpost, a ring of weathered stones half buried in moss. There they halted to rest and take what food they had. Gimli sat upon a boulder, sharpening his axe while the riders tended their weary horses. "I'll say this, Legolas," he muttered. "The folk of Rohan built sturdier watchtowers than I gave them credit for. Even the crows won't claim this one." Legolas smiled faintly, though his thoughts were elsewhere. In ancient days, these lands were well guarded. Few now remember how far Gondor's reach once extended. The dwarf grunted. "Aye, and fewer still remember to keep their walls manned." Before the elf could reply, one of the scouts cried out softly, "Riders, on the plain below!" They rose at once and climbed to a high ledge overlooking the valley. Far off, moving between the folds of the hills, a small band of horsemen was visible, 5 or 6 at most. Their banners were tattered, and their armor glinted black in the sunlight. Legolas's sharp eyes caught the sigil upon their shields. "Not Rohirrim," he said. "Their gear is of Gondor's make, but long unkept." Gimli frowned. "Outlaws, then?" "Perhaps," said the elf. "Or worse." The band below halted for a moment, as though scanning the ridge. Then, without a word, they turned eastward and began to ride again, vanishing behind a line of stony hills. Legolas's unease deepened. "They move with purpose," he said. "I would know their errand. Saddle your horses. We shall follow at a distance." Through the afternoon they tracked the riders, careful to keep beyond sight. The trail led into a narrow defile where the mountains pressed close. The air there grew still and heavy. At last, when the shadows lengthened, they came upon a hollow in the cliffs where the riders had made camp. Legolas signaled for silence and crept forward. The voices of men reached his ears, harsh, weary, yet disciplined. He saw them gathered around a low fire, their armor blackened, their faces pale and stern. On their shields, beneath the grime, gleamed a faded white tree. "Gondorians," whispered Edric. "Aye," said Legolas, "but not of the city. Look, their captain bears the emblem of Ithilien. Rangers, perhaps, who have strayed far from their post." They listened a while longer. Snatches of conversation drifted up to them. Words of Mordor, of ruined towers, of some secret mission gone awry. Then one voice rose clearer than the rest, speaking in tones of command. "We ride for the crossings of Poros," said the captain. "There we will find the one who calls himself the Mouth. Our duty is to deliver the token and receive our master's word." Legolas's blood ran cold. Gimli swore softly. "So it is true, then. Saruman's reach has touched even men." The elf turned to the company. "We dare not confront them yet. If they carry tidings for Mordor, we must learn more before we strike. Come, we'll shadow them through the night." Thus began a grim pursuit, more silent than the hunt for orcs. The company followed the black-clad riders across barren hills and through narrow passes where no song of bird was heard. The stars wheeled overhead, veiled by drifting cloud, and the moon cast long pale beams upon the stone. Once, as they crossed a narrow bridge of rock, Gimli stumbled upon a fragment of something buried in the dust, a piece of broken steel shaped like an arrowhead, etched with runes of the White Hand. The dwarf lifted it grimly. "More of Saruman's craft," he muttered. "The land itself bears his taint." Legolas said nothing. His eyes were fixed upon the dark horizon, where the shadow of the mountains met the plain. There, faint as mist, a red glow shimmered in the far distance, not firelight, but something deeper, more sinister. "The east," he murmured. "Even from here, its breath reaches us." When dawn came again, the riders they followed halted upon a stony ridge overlooking the plains of Gondor. The company hid among the rocks and watched as the black-clad men unfurled a tattered banner, the White Hand upon a field of grey. Legolas's heart grew heavy. The sign of Saruman still rode the wind, though Isengard lay broken. "We must bring word of this to King Theoden," said Edric. Legolas shook his head. "Not yet. If they are bound for Mordor, their path may lead us to the truth of this alliance. We follow still, until the road itself forbids us." Gimli sighed, tightening his grip upon his axe. "Then may the Valar grant us stout hearts and steady feet, for I fear this road leads us close to the Black Land indeed." Legolas looked eastward once more, his eyes bright as steel. "So be it," he said. "If the shadow spreads beyond Isengard, then we shall meet it upon the road. The hunt is not yet ended." And beneath the rising sun, the small company of elf, dwarf, and men rode onward, their path winding ever nearer to the dark plain where the will of Mordor still stirred. The third dawn found the hunters upon the windswept borderlands of Gondor. Here the mountains fell away in long, sloping shoulders of stone, giving view to the wide plains that stretched eastward, pale beneath the morning sun. The land was silent, save for the rustle of dry grass and the distant cry of crows. No villages lay within sight. No smoke of hearth or forge rose to mark the dwelling of men. It was a forsaken country, left untended since the days when the strength of Gondor waned. Legolas rode at the front, his cloak billowing softly behind him. His eyes, bright and keen, never ceased to move, searching the horizon for sign of the riders they pursued. Behind him came Gimli, sturdy and grim, muttering to himself as he urged his pony along the rocky trail. The 3 Rohirrim scouts followed close, weary but resolute. For a time, no trace of the black-clad men could be seen. The trail grew faint, lost among the hills and hollows of the land. Yet Legolas felt their presence ahead, as if the air itself whispered of their passing. Now and then, he would halt and kneel upon the earth, touching the dust with his long fingers. "They ride still eastward," he would say quietly. 2 days ahead, perhaps less. By midday, clouds had gathered over the mountains, and a chill wind swept down from the heights. The sky darkened, heavy with rain. They pressed on until the light began to fade, then made camp in the shelter of a low ridge. As Gimli tended the small fire, the young rider Edric came to sit beside Legolas. "My lord," he said, his voice uncertain, "do you think we can truly learn what drives these men? If they serve the White Hand, why travel east? Is not Saruman fallen?" Legolas gazed into the distance, where lightning flickered among the clouds. "Evil seldom dies as swiftly as its master's body," he answered. "Saruman's pride lived long before his tower fell. He may have promised allegiance to Mordor, seeking favor or refuge. These men might carry proof of that, words or tokens meant for the Dark Lord's herald." Edric frowned. "And if they reach him? Then the shadow will darken even swifter," the elf said. for Mordor would claim all that Saruman built, his forges, his beasts, and his cunning. If the two were ever truly united, all free folk of the West would suffer for it. The young man was silent after that, staring into the fire as rain began to fall. Through the night they took turns keeping watch. The rain became a steady curtain, drumming softly upon their cloaks and helms. When dawn broke again, the storm had passed, leaving the air sharp and clear. In the washed light of morning, Legolas found what he had been seeking, the faint prints of hooves upon the wet soil, leading down into a deep vale. They followed swiftly. The path wound through thickets of dark trees and over shallow streams that glimmered with the reflection of the pale sun. Near midday they came upon the ruins of a bridge, a single broken span of stone crossing a narrow gorge. Below, a river foamed white among jagged rocks. "The Bridge of Calenhir," said one of the riders softly. "It once marked the boundary of Gondor's watch." "Long abandoned now," said Gimli, peering into the chasm. "But see, the riders crossed here. Their horses' prints are fresh." They led their mounts carefully over the remains of the bridge, for part of it had fallen into the river long ago. On the far side, the tracks climbed a ridge and vanished among the trees. By afternoon, they reached a glade where the forest opened wide to the sun. There, upon the grass, they found the ashes of a fire, still warm. "They rested here not long ago," said Legolas. He knelt beside the ashes and brushed them with his hand. "Perhaps but a few hours." Gimli looked about, his axe ready. "Then they cannot be far." Even as he spoke, a faint sound came from beyond the trees, the creak of leather, the clink of metal. Legolas raised a hand for silence. Slowly he moved forward, parting the branches. In a clearing ahead stood the riders they had pursued, their dark cloaks drawn close, their horses grazing quietly. They were fewer now, only 5 remained. The 6th lay dead upon the grass, a black-feathered arrow protruding from his throat. Legolas studied the scene in silence. "They have been attacked," he murmured. Edric frowned. "By whom?" Before Legolas could answer, a voice drifted through the trees, harsh and guttural, speaking the coarse tongue of orcs. More followed, nearer this time. The elf's eyes hardened. "Orcs," he said. "A scouting band. They must have followed the same trail." The men in the clearing had not yet seen their foes. They were arguing quietly over their fallen companion, one of them clutching a small satchel, bound in black cloth. "We cannot remain here," said the leader sharply. "Take the token and ride for the east. The rest of us will delay them." The others nodded grimly. One man mounted his horse, clutching the satchel close, and spurred it toward the far edge of the glade. Legolas turned to his companions. "We move now. If that satchel bears tidings for Mordor, it must not leave this forest." He drew an arrow and sprang forward, swift as a shadow. The company followed, bursting into the glade as the black-clad riders turned in alarm. For a moment, confusion held all frozen. Then the orcs broke from the trees on the far side, howling. Arrows hissed through the air. One of the Gondorian men fell, another wheeled his horse and fled. The rest met the orcs in a clash of steel and cries. Legolas's first arrow struck the fleeing messenger's steed in the shoulder, sending horse and rider tumbling to the earth. The man rolled to his feet and drew his sword, his eyes blazing with desperate fury. "Stay back, elf," he shouted. "You know not what you interfere with." Legolas approached warily, bow still drawn. "I know enough, that you serve the hand of treachery. Surrender what you carry." The man hesitated, glancing toward the satchel. Then, with a sudden cry, he lunged. His blade gleamed white in the sunlight, but Legolas moved faster. The bowstring sang, and the arrow struck his arm, sending the sword spinning from his grasp. Gimli charged through the underbrush with a bellow, his axe cleaving another of the black riders who had turned upon them. The air filled with the clash of steel and the snarl of orcs. Within moments, the glade was a storm of battle. The orcs, fierce and many, fell upon both groups without distinction. The men of Gondor, outnumbered, fought back to back with grim resolve, while Legolas and Gimli wove among them like wind and thunder. When the last orc fell, silence returned, broken only by the labored breathing of the survivors. Of the 5 black-clad men, 2 still lived, 1 wounded, the other trembling with rage. Legolas stepped forward, lowering his bow. "Your master's road ends here. Speak, and you may yet earn mercy." The wounded man spat into the grass. "Mercy from an elf! Keep your pity, forest-kin. We are already damned." His companion reached for the fallen satchel, but Gimli's boot came down hard upon it. "Not so fast," he growled. Legolas stooped and lifted the satchel. Within lay a small metal box bound with wire and sealed with the white hand of Isengard. The elf frowned. "Another token for Mordor," he said. "We will see what message it carries when we reach safer ground." The surviving man sneered. "You'll not understand it. None but the Mouth himself can read the code of the tower." "Then he shall not have the chance," said Legolas. They left the clearing behind, taking the 2 captives and the satchel. When the forest closed about them once more, a deep unease settled over the company. For though victory had been theirs, Legolas could not shake the feeling that the hand of some unseen power still guided these events, that every step drew them closer to a shadow far greater than Saruman's fading might. And as evening fell, the elf looked eastward once more toward the dark horizon where storm clouds gathered like smoke, and whispered, "The Eye is watching." The forest deepened as they rode, old and tangled, its roots rising like the bones of the earth. The rain of the previous night had left the ground soft beneath the hooves of their mounts, and the air smelled of moss and wet bark. The wounded prisoners were bound and slung across 2 horses, their hands tied before them. They spoke little, muttering now and then in a harsh dialect of Gondor's southern tongue, words Legolas scarcely cared to hear. The company moved in grim silence. The young riders kept close together, casting wary glances toward the trees, where the fog drifted low like breath from unseen mouths. Even Gimli, who was seldom troubled by the wild, seemed uneasy. "These woods are no place for the living," he said at last. "I'd wager my beard they've not seen the sun in many an age." "You're not far wrong," replied Legolas, his voice soft but alert. "This forest was once part of the realm of Anorian, but it has long since fallen to shadow. Few travelers pass this way now." As if in answer, a raven croaked high above, then took flight, disappearing into the mist. The sound echoed through the trees like a warning. By midday they reached a stream, narrow but swift. They halted there to water the horses and rest. The captives were brought to a rock by the bank, and one of them, the younger of the 2, lifted his head. His eyes were grey, keen beneath a mask of weariness. "You think yourselves wise," he said bitterly. "Yet you understand nothing of the war that comes. You chase ghosts while the world burns." Legolas regarded him calmly. "Speak, then, and teach us your wisdom." The man's lips curled. "Saruman's war is ended. You broke his armies, burned his forges. But what rises in his place is older and greater than all your kindred know. We serve not the White Hand, nor the Black Eye. We serve the Voice." Gimli scowled. "The Voice? Speak plainly, man, or keep your riddles to yourself." But the prisoner only laughed, a hollow, joyless sound. "You will hear it soon enough. None who walk east may escape it." Legolas turned away, unwilling to waste more words. yet his thoughts lingered uneasily. The voice, he had heard whispers of such a title before, spoken among travelers from the south. Could it be some remnant of Saruman's power, echoing even after the fall of Isengard? When they set out again, the path grew steeper. The trees closed in tightly, and the light dimmed to a greenish haze. Branches brushed their shoulders like fingers. The murmur of the stream faded behind them, replaced by the distant rumble of thunder. As they climbed, Edric rode up beside Legolas. "My lord," he said quietly, "there are shapes moving behind us. At first I thought them shadows, but they keep to our trail." Legolas turned his keen eyes to the path they had left. Through the mist he caught glimpses of movement, swift, darting between the trunks. Not orcs, for the shapes were too tall and graceful. Not men either, for they moved with uncanny silence. "Stay close," he said, "and make no sound. We are being watched." The riders drew their swords, but before they could form a line, a voice spoke from the trees, low and clear, like water flowing over stone. "Hold your hands, strangers. You tread upon the borders of Ithilien." From the shadows stepped a company of rangers, cloaked in green and brown. Their bows were drawn, but their faces, though stern, bore no malice. The leader was tall, with dark hair streaked by silver, and eyes that held both weariness and wisdom. Legolas straightened in his saddle. "Rangers of Gondor," he said, "we mean no harm. I am Legolas of the Woodland Realm, and these are companions of Rohan. We follow a trail of treachery that leads east." The ranger captain lowered his bow slightly. "Legolas? Then I know your name by the word of Faramir, captain of Ithilien." He spoke of an elf who fought beside the king's company. "What brings you so far from Rohan's fields?" Legolas gestured to the prisoners. "These men bear messages from the servants of Saruman to the allies of Mordor. We have taken them in pursuit of a stolen map, and of something darker that stirs between Isengard and the Black Land." The captain's gaze darkened. "Then you are right to come. We have seen signs of unrest in these parts. Strange gatherings by night, the sound of horns in the old ruins. Come with us. You will be safer beneath our watch." So they followed the rangers deeper into the forest, until they came to a hidden refuge among the rocks, a small encampment built near a spring that ran clear from the mountain. There they were given food and rest, and the captives were bound more securely. As night fell, the ranger captain came to sit beside Legolas near the fire. "I am Mardil," he said, "captain under Faramir's command, though we have been cut off since the war's beginning. Many of our men are scattered, some lost. You spoke of a map. What lies upon it?" Legolas drew forth the scroll from his pouch. "It marks the secret ways through the mountains, paths once used by the riders of Rohan and the scouts of Lorien. If this had reached Mordor, Lothlorien might have been laid bare." Mardil studied the lines by firelight, his expression grim. "It is well you recovered it. There are few now who know these roads. Yet you say Saruman's men carried a token for Mordor?" "Aye," said Legolas, "a sealed box bearing the mark of the White Hand. We have not yet opened it." The captain's eyes flicked toward the satchel, which lay upon a stone nearby. "Then let us see what truth it hides." Together they broke the seal. Within the box was a shard of white crystal, bound in silver wire. At first it seemed harmless, but as Legolas held it up, the flame of the fire dimmed, and a faint whisper filled the air. A voice distant and cold, speaking words in no tongue of men or elves. The sound sent a shiver through all who heard it. Even the wind seemed to falter. "What sorcery is this?" muttered Gimli. Mardil's face grew pale, I have heard such whispers before. In Osgiliath, when the enemy's will pressed upon the city. It is a seeing stone, or a fragment of one, perhaps, bound to the will of its master. Legolas lowered the shard swiftly. Then it must be destroyed. Not here, said Mardil. Its power would draw the eye. We will carry it to Henneth Annwn, where Faramir once kept watch. The falls will hide us from all evil sight. So they quenched the fire and prepared to ride at dawn. Yet even as the night deepened, a heaviness settled upon the camp. The crystal shard, wrapped again in cloth, seemed to throb faintly, as though alive. Legolas sat awake beneath the stars, his bow across his knees, listening to the forest. Far away, beyond the veil of trees, he thought he heard a sound. The echo of a horn, long and mournful, carried on the wind from the east. When Gimli stirred beside him, the elf didn't speak, for he knew that what he had heard was no trick of the night. It was a summons, a call from some gathering darkness that waited beyond the mountains. And though dawn was yet far, Legolas felt that the day ahead would bring them into the heart of peril, where old oaths would be tested and the hand of the enemy would reach for them once more. The dawn came pale and cold over the forest of Ithilien, the mist rising in soft tendrils from the mossy ground. Birds stirred among the leaves, their calls faint and distant, as though wary of breaking the heavy silence that had settled through the night. Legolas stood apart from the camp, watching the light creep through the branches, his hand resting upon the hilt of his long knife. Behind him, the company readied to depart. The rangers of Ithilien moved quietly, efficient and grim. Mardil, their captain, oversaw the preparations with a calm authority, though there was tension in his movements. Gimli stamped about, fastening his gear and muttering about elvish sleeplessness and the need for a proper meal before dawn. The prisoners, bound and silent, sat under guard near the cold embers of the fire, their faces pale and unreadable. Legolas turned as Mardil approached. "We ride east," said the ranger, "by the hidden paths that lead to Henneth Annwn. If we move swiftly, we can reach the falls before nightfall. There the shard will be kept safe from prying eyes." The elf nodded. Let us hope the shadow has not already learned our road. As they mounted and rode out, the sun broke faintly through the clouds, but the light was thin, ghost-like. The forest floor was slick with dew, and the horses' hooves made no sound upon the soft earth. Legolas rode ahead with Mardil, while Gimli followed behind, keeping a wary eye on the prisoners. The Rohirrim scouts rode in the center, their hands tight on the reins, for the air itself felt watchful. The path wound through the ancient trees of Ithilien, beeches and oaks older than the memory of men. Shafts of pale sunlight filtered down, glimmering on leaves wet with rain. Yet despite the beauty of the forest, there was unease among them. Now and then, Legolas would turn his head sharply, his keen senses pricked by something unseen, a faint tremor in the ground, a change in the whisper of the wind. Near midday they came to a clearing where the trees parted, around a broad hill, crowned with ruined stone. Moss and ivy clung to the crumbling walls, and among them stood a tall, broken pillar, carved long ago with the emblems of Gondor. Mardil raised a hand for halt. "This was once a watchtower," he said softly. "We'll rest here for a short while. The horses need water." While the men tended to the beasts, Legolas climbed the slope to the top of the hill. From there he could see far, the green sea of Ithilien stretching toward the hazy line of the Anduin, and beyond that, the dim peaks of the Efelduth, sharp as teeth against the horizon. Even from this distance, a faint red glimmer hung above them, as though the earth smoldered beneath its skin. He stood long upon that height, his keen sight drawn eastward. Though the sun was bright upon the world, he felt the weight of shadow pressing from afar, heavy as a storm before the rain. When he descended, Gimli met him halfway up the slope. "You see something troubling, I'll wager," said the dwarf, peering upward with narrowed eyes. "Aye," replied Legolas. "There is movement near the river. Columns of smoke, faint but rising. Whether it is fire or war, I cannot yet tell." Gimli grunted. "War, most like. The world has grown fond of it of late." Before Legolas could answer, a cry rang out from below. They hurried down the slope to find the camp in disarray. One of the rangers knelt beside a fallen man, one of the prisoners. His bonds had been cut, his eyes glazed and staring. "Dead," said the ranger grimly. "A blade across the throat." Mardil's face darkened. "The other one?" "Gone." Legolas dropped to one knee, studying the ground. "He slipped his bonds during our rest," he said quietly. "There, see how the grass bends?" He went north, toward the stream. Mardil's jaw tightened. After him. He must not be allowed to reach the road. Without waiting, Legolas sprang forward, swift as an arrow from the string. Gimli followed, muttering under his breath, but moving with surprising speed. The rangers spread out behind them, their cloaks blending with the green shadows. The trail was easy to follow, for one with elven eyes. The fugitive had stumbled through the undergrowth, tearing leaves and snapping branches in his haste. Soon they heard the rush of the stream ahead, and above it, the faint splash of hurried steps through shallow water. Legolas slowed and raised his hand. He is near. They moved silently until they came to a small clearing where the stream curved around a mossy rock. There the escaped man crouched, bent over the bundle he carried, the satchel that had held the shard. The wrappings lay torn open, and the crystal within gleamed faintly, even in daylight. The man's lips moved, murmuring words that made the air tremble. A faint whisper rose again, that same eerie voice from the night before. The water at his feet rippled, though no wind stirred it. Legolas drew an arrow. "Stop!" he called, stepping into the open. "Lay down the shard." The man turned, his face twisted with both fear and ecstasy. "You cannot command me, elf," he hissed. "The voice calls. The white hand still serves the eye." He raised the crystal high, and a pale light burst from it, blinding and cold. Gimli shielded his eyes with a curse, while the rangers cried out. Legolas loosed his arrow, but the man staggered backward into the stream. The arrow struck the crystal instead of flesh. The light shattered with a thunderous crack. A wave of force rippled through the clearing, hurling them all to the ground. The trees shuddered, as though struck by storm winds, and the stream foamed white. When the sound faded, the air was thick with mist and the stench of burned grass. Legolas rose swiftly, his ears ringing. Where the man had stood, there was now only ash. The crystal shard lay broken, its silver binding twisted and darkened. Mardil came running through the trees, his face pale. "What happened?" "The shard is destroyed," Legolas said, his voice low, "but not before its power was loosed. That light, it was seen far and wide." The ranger glanced eastward uneasily. "Then we must ride hard. If the eye still watches, its servants will come." They gathered their company and rode without rest through the afternoon. The forest seemed darker now, the air heavy and watchful. No bird sang, and even the wind held its breath. As twilight deepened, they reached the hidden cleft that led to Henneth Annwn. The sound of falling water filled the air, a steady roar that grew louder as they descended. At last they came to the secret cave behind the curtain of the falls, where lanterns flickered in the dimness, and the scent of damp stone filled the air. Mardil's men moved quickly, securing the entrance and tending to the weary horses. Gimli sank heavily upon a rock, wiping sweat from his brow. "By Mahal, I'll never curse water again," he muttered. "At least it drowns the sound of my own heart beating." Legolas said nothing. He stood at the mouth of the cavern, gazing through the veil of water toward the darkening forest beyond. The east glowed faintly, as though lightning played without thunder. "We are safe for now," said Mardil quietly beside him. "But if the enemy saw that light, his servants will not rest until they find its source." Legolas nodded. "I fear the shard was but a fragment of greater design. Whatever voice called through it has not fallen silent." He turned from the falls and looked upon his companions, the weary rangers, the young riders of Rohan, the steadfast dwarf at his side. "Rest while you may," he said, "for when dawn comes, the road will lead us farther east, and the shadow grows stronger with every step." And as the night deepened, and the waters of Henneth Annwn roared unceasingly beyond the stone, Legolas of the woodland realm kept his silent watch, his eyes bright and far-seeing, while the dark of Mordor brooded upon the horizon, gathering strength for what was yet to come. Dawn crept pale and silent over Ithilien, filtering through the falling waters that veiled the hidden refuge of Henneth Annwn. The steady thunder of the cascade filled the air, its silver light glimmering upon the faces of those within the cavern. The men stirred from uneasy sleep. Some polished their weapons, others kindled small lamps whose flames flickered upon the wet stone. But Legolas did not sleep. He had sat through the night at the entrance, watching the thin stars fade beyond the veil of water. When the first gleam of sunlight touched the stream below, Mardil approached him. "You keep watch as though expecting the mountains to move," said the ranger softly. "Rest a while, elf of the wood. None may find us here." Legolas turned his clear gaze upon him. "None who walk in flesh, perhaps. Yet there are eyes that do not rest. The shard we broke was no trinket. It bore a whisper of the enemy's power. Its echo may reach ears we cannot see." Mardil nodded grimly. "Then we must decide swiftly what is to be done. If you still mean to follow this trail, you will not do so with only my few men." Before Legolas could reply, Gimli appeared from the shadows, rubbing his beard and grumbling. "If he's to ride east again, he'll not do it without me. I've no taste for sitting safe while shadows plot in secret. We came to end this mischief, and end it we shall." A faint smile touched the elf's lips. "Your courage is constant, son of Glóin." "Stubbornness, more like," said Gimli. "But it serves as well in a fight." They shared a brief look of understanding, the bond forged between them, since Helm's Deep had grown strong, and neither needed many words. By mid-morning, the company gathered to plan. The rangers spoke of patrols lost in the southern vales, and of strange lights seen by night, blue flames flickering among ruins once built by men. Rumor held that an old fortress, Minas Dalgor, had been taken by creatures loyal neither to Sauron nor to the free peoples. "It lies 3 days east of here," said Mardil. "Long abandoned since the wars of old, but lately we have found footprints near its gates, booted, not bare, and heavy with armor. If Saruman's remnant still clings to life, that is where they will make their lair." Legolas rose. "Then our road is chosen. We will go to Minas Dalgor." Mardil's brow furrowed. "It is perilous. The land between is watched. I can spare but 5 men to guide you, no more." "5 will suffice," said Legolas. "We go to sea, not to storm a fortress." So they prepared once more for the road. The crystal shard, now lifeless, was wrapped in thick cloth and placed within a lead-bound chest that would block its remaining whisper. The bodies of the fallen were given to the river, and before they departed, Mardil stood before his men. "If we do not return within 7 days," he said, "send word to Faramir in Minas Tirith. Tell him that a shadow stirs in the east of Ithilien." The journey began beneath a grey sky. Clouds rolled low over the woods, and the air smelled of damp earth and fern. The company rode lightly, their cloaks blending with the colour of the trees. They passed through glens where ruins slept half buried under ivy, remnants of towers and walls, forgotten names etched upon broken stone. Sometimes, faint echoes of ancient songs seemed to linger among the leaves, the ghosts of Gondor's glory. By the second day, the woods thinned, giving way to open ridges and rolling heaths. From the heights, they could see the Anduin glimmering like a silver thread far to the west, and beyond it, the faint outline of the White Mountains. But eastward, the land darkened. Clouds gathered low over the distant hills, and the sun's light seemed to wither as it touched the ground. That night they made camp in a hollow, sheltered by thorn and bramble. No fire was lit, for the air was heavy with dread. The wind shifted often, carrying strange sounds. The faint ring of metal, the wail of a far-off horn. Legolas sat apart, his eyes turned toward the east. Gimli joined him, lowering himself onto a stone with a sigh. "I do not like this silence," said the dwarf. "It feels as though the land itself listens." "The land remembers," said Legolas softly. "It once bore the tread of armies, the cries of men and orcs alike. Memory clings to such places." "Then may those memories stay buried," muttered Gimli, gripping his axe. They spoke no more, but as the night deepened, Legolas's keen hearing caught faint steps. Not the tread of men, nor the scuttle of beasts. He rose swiftly, bow in hand. "We are watched," he whispered. In the next instant, shapes moved among the shadows, tall, swift, and silent. Arrows hissed from the dark, thudding into the ground near the sleeping men. The rangers leapt to their feet, drawing blades. "Hold your ground!" cried Mardil, springing to defend his men. Legolas loosed an arrow, and a cry answered from the darkness. Then the attackers broke from cover, not orcs, but men, clad in dark mail and bearing the white hand upon their helms. Their faces were pale, eyes fever-bright. "Servants of Isengard!" Gimli roared. "I thought we'd done with you lot." Steel met steel beneath the starlight. The battle was fierce but swift. Legolas moved like the wind, each arrow finding its mark. Gimli's axe sang as it cleaved through armor and bone. Yet their foes fought with unnatural fury, as though driven by something beyond fear or hate. At last the last of them fell, pierced by the rangers' blades. One still breathed, a tall man with a scarred face. Mardil knelt beside him, pressing a knife to his throat. "Who commands you?" The man's lips curled in a grim smile. "The White Wizard commands none," he rasped. "We serve his voice. It speaks from the ruins, and we obey." Then he shuddered once, and died. Legolas rose, his expression grave. "The voice again," he said. "And now it calls from Minas Dalgor." The company buried their dead before dawn and pressed on. The sky grew darker with each passing mile. Strange mists rose from the valleys, thick and chill, muffling every sound. By the third evening, they saw the fortress. It stood upon a black hill, its towers broken and leaning, yet some light glowed faintly within. A cold, sickly radiance that pulsed like a dying ember. Around its base wound a narrow path of stone, half overgrown with weeds. They halted among the trees below. No guards moved upon the walls, but a deep hum filled the air, a vibration that made the hairs upon the neck stand upright. "That place breathes evil," said Gimli quietly. "You can feel it." Legolas's face was pale in the moonlight. "Aye. The walls are not dead. They remember the voice that once ruled here." Mardil studied the ruin grimly. If the voice speaks within, we must hear it for ourselves. Yet, to enter by the gate would be folly. There are tunnels beneath the hill, remnants of Gondor's old storage vaults. We may find a way through them. So, under the shroud of night, they left their horses and crept toward the hill. The entrance to the tunnels was half hidden behind a curtain of ivy. One by one they slipped inside, torches unlit, moving by touch and instinct. The air within was cold and stale. The walls dripped with moisture, and faint echoes whispered through the stone. They descended step by step into darkness, until at last a pale light appeared ahead, flickering, uncertain, like moonlight reflected on water. Legolas motioned for silence. He moved forward and peered into the chamber beyond. There, upon a high dais, stood a figure, cloaked, motionless. Before it burned a single white flame, and in its hand was something that gleamed faintly like crystal. A voice rose, smooth and cold, echoing from every wall. "Welcome, wanderers of the West. The White Hand has not forgotten you." The company froze. Gimli's hand tightened on his axe. Mardil drew breath sharply. But Legolas stood still as stone, his eyes fixed upon the shadowed figure, for he knew that voice. Or rather, the echo of it. It was Saruman's voice, changed yet unmistakable, resonating with the same terrible power that once bent kings to his will. And as its words rolled through the chamber, the torch in Mardil's hand flickered and died, leaving them in utter dark, while the white flame upon the dais flared higher, cold and pure, as though it fed upon their fear. The cold white flame wavered upon the dais, casting long shadows that seemed to breathe and move upon the walls. The figure standing before it was tall and cloaked in grey, the hood drawn low, so that only the gleam of pale light caught the edge of a jaw and the curve of a thin, cruel smile. The voice filled the chamber, low and resonant, echoing from the stone like the deep tolling of a bell. "So," it said, "the last hounds of the West have come sniffing at the ruins of their own past. You come seeking the White Hand, yet you find the hand still raised. Did you think Saruman's wisdom would perish with his flesh?" Legolas stood unmoving, though the air seemed to grow heavier with each word. The others had drawn back into the shadows, Gimli's hand upon his axe, Mardil's men clutching their blades as though steel alone could shield them from that dreadful voice. Legolas's tone was calm, but his voice carried clear through the echo. "You are not Saruman," he said, "nor do you wield his power." His staff was broken, his voice silenced upon the road to the Shire. "What shadow of him lingers here?" The figure laughed softly, the sound twisting through the chamber. A shadow, yes, but one that learned well. He poured his will into the stones of Isengard, into the wind that carried his words. When Orthanc fell, not all was undone. The voice endured. I am its echo, its heir, the vessel of what he left behind. The hand that still serves purpose when the body is dust. Gimli's growl rumbled like distant thunder. "I've heard enough of cursed tongues. Speak sense, or I'll make you shorter by a head." The flame flared brighter, and the figure's laughter deepened. Ah, the dwarf of the fellowship, the axe that sang at Helm's Deep, and the elf beside him, whose bow brought down 100 foes. I know you, children of the West. Your names were spoken in the councils of Isengard. At this, Mardil stepped forward. If you know us, then you know we will not leave until we've torn down this evil and all who serve it. Surrender the relics of your master, and yield this place." The voice turned toward him. Though the hood concealed its face, Mardil stumbled as if struck. The unseen power in that gaze pressed upon his mind like iron. "Yield?" it said softly. "You speak of yielding as if you still rule these lands. But look around you, Captain of Gondor. What do your kind rule now? Crumbling stones and empty halls." Mardil sank to one knee, gasping. The rangers rushed forward, but Legolas raised a hand to stay them. He stepped slowly toward the dais, his eyes shining with cold light. "Enough. You wield words as weapons, yet words will not save you. Release him, and speak no more riddles." The voice drew back its hood then, and all who looked beheld a man, or something that had once been one. His skin was pale as marble, his hair white as bone. His eyes, grey and depthless, gleamed with a light that did not belong to mortal kind. In his hand, he held a shard of crystal, faintly glowing, the twin of that which had shattered in the forest. "You see," he whispered, "the voice needs no flesh. It speaks through stone, through memory, through the will of those who still serve. The shards were many. You broke one, but others remain. With them, I command what was left of the White Hand, and soon, even Mordor will bend its ear to me." Gimli spat upon the ground. "Then you're nothing more than a thief of a dead wizard's tricks. Let's see if your voice can stop my axe." Before Legolas could halt him, the dwarf charged. His axe gleamed in the pale light, and his war cry echoed through the chamber. But as he reached the dais, the figure raised the crystal high. A blast of white flame burst forth, striking Gimli square in the chest. The dwarf was hurled backward like a leaf in a storm, his axe clattering from his hand. Legolas's bow was in his grasp before Gimli hit the ground. He loosed an arrow, swift and sure, but the air around the figure shimmered, and the arrow veered aside as though striking an unseen barrier. "You cannot kill a voice," it said. "You can only listen." But Legolas's eyes blazed. "Then I shall silence you instead." He drew again, this time whispering words of the woodland realm, ancient as the stars. His arrow shone with a pale light, its fletching burning silver. When he loosed it, the shaft flew straight through the barrier, striking the crystal in the figure's hand. A scream tore through the hall, a sound of both man and shadow. The crystal shattered, shards scattering like sparks. The figure staggered, clutching its chest as the white flame guttered. "You fool!" it gasped. "You break what you cannot unmake." The ground trembled. From the cracks in the dais poured a mist black as pitch, writhing and twisting as it rose. It gathered above them like a storm, forming vague shapes, faces that wailed and vanished, the ghosts of all who had fallen to Saruman's deceit. Legolas leapt down, seizing Gimli by the arm. "We must go!" Mardil, pale but standing, rallied his men. "Back to the tunnels, go!" They fled through the winding passages as the fortress groaned and shuddered around them. Stones fell, dust choking the air. Behind them, the white flame flared once more, and a great voice cried out. Not from a throat, but from the very walls. "The White Hand endures!" Then came a sound like thunder. The tunnels shook, and a rush of wind swept through them, carrying the faint echo of laughter that chilled the blood. At last they burst from the hidden entrance into the night air. The hill above them glowed faintly, cracks of light running down its sides like veins of fire. Then, with a roar, the summit collapsed inward, burying the fortress beneath a cloud of dust and ash. They fell to their knees upon the grass, gasping. The night was eerily still. The only sound was the wind whispering through the reeds. Gimli groaned and sat up, his armor scorched and dented. "If ever I hear another wizard's voice again," he muttered, "I'll stuff my ears with stone." Legolas knelt beside him. "You are unhurt?" "Only singed. I've had worse from dragon fire." He spat into the dirt. "Did we slay it then?" Legolas looked back toward the smoking ruin. The hill still glowed faintly, like a coal that refused to die. "No," he said softly. "Not slain. The voice was bound to those shards. A fragment of Saruman's will. We broke its vessel, but its echo lingers. It may yet seek another." Mardil approached, weary but resolute. "Then Gondor must be warned. Faramir must hear of this. If such relics remain, they must be found and destroyed before they reach darker hands." "Aye," said Legolas. "The shards must not fall to the east. For if the eye and the hand ever clasp, the shadow will rise anew." They turned away as the first light of dawn touched the sky. The smoke from the ruins drifted westward, fading into the pale air. And as they rode back through the silent woods of Ithilien, Legolas cast one last glance behind. The hill was dark now, still and cold, yet faint upon the wind. He thought he heard a whisper, soft and lingering. The voice remembers. He said nothing, but his heart was troubled. For though the fortress had fallen, he knew the power that once made kings tremble was not so easily undone. Somewhere in Middle-earth, a new echo was already stirring. Faint, waiting, and listening, the company rode westward in silence. The forest of Ithilien stretched wide and still about them, shrouded in early mist, as though the land itself withheld its breath. The sun was yet low, casting long beams through the trees, and the air smelled faintly of ash. None spoke of what they had left behind on the black hill, nor of the voice that had haunted the stones, though its echo still lingered faintly in the hollow of their hearts. Legolas rode at the front, his fair hair dimmed with dust, his keen eyes ever sweeping the shadows. Behind him came Gimli, grumbling softly to himself, and the rangers of Ithilien followed in weary order. The battle in the fortress had left them bruised and sore, but alive. That alone, in those grim days, was counted a victory. When the sun climbed higher, they came to a glade where the forest opened wide, and the earth grew soft with grass. There they halted to rest and tend their wounds. The men set down their packs, the horses were loosed to graze, and Gimli at once threw himself upon a fallen log with a sigh of deep contentment. "By Mahal's beard," he said, "I'll take the smell of pine over the stink of wizard's fire any day. I thought the whole mountain would come down upon our heads." "It nearly did," replied Legolas, kneeling by a stream to wash the soot from his hands. "But evil that feeds on its own deceit seldom endures long. Still, I fear the ruin we left behind may not be the end of it." Gimli raised an eyebrow. "You think the cursed thing still lives?" The elf did not answer at once. He looked eastward, where the trees grew darker, and the faint trace of smoke still hung like a memory in the air. "No voice born of malice truly dies," he said at last. "It lingers in the hearts of those who heard it, whispering when the world is quiet. What we faced was but an echo, yet echoes travel far." The dwarf grunted, but said no more. He had seen enough of such things to know that elves were seldom wrong in matters of shadow. By midday the company was ready to move again. Mardil, though pale and wearied, stood firm. "We will make for the western road," he said. "It leads to the crossings of the Poros. From there, we may find safe passage back to Minas Tirith." They set out once more. The path wound down through deep ravines where ancient trees grew close together, their roots knotted like old scars. The sound of birds returned at last, faint and cautious, and shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy in golden spears. Toward evening they came upon the ruins of an old watchtower, half swallowed by ivy. Its stones were broken and green with moss, but one wall still stood, bearing the carved emblem of the white tree. Mardil ordered the company to camp there, for the place offered shelter and a high view of the surrounding land. As night fell, a small fire was kindled within the tower's shadow. The men gathered around it, their faces lit by the flickering glow. One of the younger rangers, Tharan, sat polishing his sword and glanced toward Legolas. "My lord," he said, "is it true that Saruman's power came from the voice alone? That he could turn hearts with words, as others do with blades?" Legolas nodded slowly. "It is true. His speech could wound or heal, deceive or persuade, as he chose. He was once wise beyond all measure, but his wisdom turned to pride, and pride to poison. He learned to love the sound of his own counsel more than the truth it once held. And so his voice became a weapon, sharper than any sword." The young man shivered. "Then what we heard in the fortress, was that his spirit?" "Not his spirit," the elf answered. "Only a fragment of will, bound to the remnants of his craft. It sought to be more than it was, but it was hollow, empty of true purpose. Still, even a shadow of such power can bring ruin if left to grow." At that, silence fell again. The fire crackled softly, and the night deepened around them. Above, the stars shone clear between the branches, and the moon rose pale and watchful. Later, when the men slept, Legolas remained wakeful as always, his gaze wandering among the trees. The forest murmured quietly, the sound of leaves and distant water weaving a song older than any tongue of men. Yet amid that peace, he felt a faint unease, as though the air itself trembled with something unseen. He rose and moved lightly to the edge of the clearing. There, beyond the line of trees, he saw a dim glow, far off, but growing brighter. It was not the red of fire, nor the soft light of stars. It was cold, white, and shifting, like the ghost of the flame that had burned in the fortress. "Legolas!" Gimli's voice came low from behind him. The dwarf was awake, his hand on the haft of his axe. "You see it too, don't you?" "Aye," the elf murmured. "Something stirs again." They woke Mardil and the rangers. Together they watched as the light pulsed faintly beyond the forest edge, moving slowly as though carried by unseen hands. Then, faint but clear, came a sound, a whisper borne on the wind, soft yet cutting through the night like a blade. "The voice remembers," the men shuddered. One crossed himself and muttered a prayer. Mardil's hand tightened upon his sword. "It cannot be," he said. "The fortress was destroyed." Legolas's expression was grave. "Evil has many roots, and fire cannot burn them all. If the shards of Saruman's craft were scattered, then others may yet remain. Perhaps another crystal lies near, seeking to awaken." Without waiting for dawn, they broke camp and rode toward the light. The forest thinned as they went, until they came upon a narrow valley veiled in mist. At its heart stood a small pool, its surface still as glass. Above it hung the pale glow, trembling like a living thing. As they drew near, the glow dimmed, then brightened again, as though aware of their presence. Legolas dismounted and stepped forward, his bow ready. "Stand back," he said softly. "It feeds upon thought and voice alike." The light began to swirl, gathering upon itself until it formed a shape. Not a body, but the outline of one, like smoke rising from a dying fire. A face emerged within it, fleeting and sorrowful, yet twisted by pride. "You would destroy me," it said, its voice faint but clear. "But you cannot undo the gift of the Maya. I am not bound to flesh. I am the will that endures." Legolas raised his bow. "You are nothing but a remnant of folly," he said, "and folly has no place among the living." He drew and loosed. The arrow struck the pool's surface, and the light shattered in a flash of silver. The water erupted, hissing like steam, and a cry rang through the valley, the last fading echo of the voice. Then all was still. The rangers lowered their weapons, staring as the mist cleared. The pool lay dark and quiet once more, reflecting only the stars above. "It is ended," said Mardil at last. Legolas looked long at the water before turning away. "Perhaps. But the world is wide, and the wind carries more than leaves. The voice may be gone, yet its memory lingers. Let us hope no one seeks to listen." They mounted and rode on through the fading night. When dawn rose once more over the forests of Ithilien, it found them upon the road to Minas Tirith, weary yet unbroken. Behind them, the pool shimmered faintly as the morning light touched it. And for a heartbeat, just before the sun cleared the hills, a ripple crossed its surface, as if something beneath had stirred once more. The dawn was cold upon the land when Legolas and his company reached the foothills of Emin Arnon. The mists that clung to the woods of Ithilien drifted behind them, curling like smoke in the pale light. To the west, the Anduin shone like a ribbon of glass, and far beyond its banks, the white towers of Minas Tirith gleamed faintly through the haze. For a moment, all halted upon a rise to gaze upon the city of the kings. The men of Gondor stood tall, their weariness forgotten as pride kindled in their eyes. Even Gimli's gruff face softened as he looked upon the shining citadel. "A fair sight, even for stonework," he said. "No dwarf could scorn such craft." Legolas smiled faintly. "And yet how strange it feels to see it thus, bright and still, while shadow creeps unseen behind. Beauty stands, but peril walks close beside it." Mardil nodded gravely. "Then let us reach its gates before either fades. The steward must know what has been uncovered in the wild." They descended toward the road that wound north to Osgiliath, passing through lands once ruined by war, but now stirring again with life. The scars of the Dark Lord's armies were still visible: blackened trees, tumbled stones, fields not yet sown. Yet in the air there was a scent of renewal, faint but true. When they reached the banks of the Anduin, a company of soldiers hailed them from the watchpost by the ferry. They were young, clad in bright mail and wearing the emblems of the White Tree. Mardil spoke briefly with their captain, and soon the party was granted passage. As the ferry drifted across the wide river, the sound of the water soothed their hearts. Gimli leaned upon the railing, gazing into the swift current. "Strange to think," he said, "that this river once bore the ships of war. Now it runs clear again, as if the land itself seeks peace." "Aye," said Legolas, "but rivers remember. They carry all that has been spilled into them: blood, tears, and the voices of the fallen. Peace is never born without memory." On the far bank, the guard saluted and guided them to a camp at the edge of Osgiliath's ruins. The ancient city lay quiet beneath the sun, its broken domes rising like bones from the earth. Yet signs of rebuilding were everywhere: stonecutters' scaffolds, fresh mortar upon old walls, and the banners of the king fluttering from towers once shattered by siege. It was there, amid the mingled scent of dust and river wind, that Legolas and Mardil met the steward of Gondor. Faramir received them in the shadow of a half-restored hall, his dark hair streaked with silver, his eyes calm, yet filled with unspoken care. "Well met, my friends," he said, clasping Mardil's arm. "Your messenger came swiftly, though his tidings were grim. Tell me now what shadow stirs in the east." So they told him of the fleeing orcs after Helm's Deep, of the stolen map, the broken shard, and the voice that lingered in the ruins of Minas Dalgor. As the tale unfolded, Faramir's face grew grave, though he asked few questions. When at last they spoke of the white flame and the echo of Saruman's power, a shadow passed across his gaze. "Long ago," he said, "Gandalf warned us that Saruman's deceit might outlive his death. He was mighty in the lore of spirits and sound, and even the smallest fragment of his craft might linger. What you faced was not his ghost, but the echo of his will, and that, perhaps, is more dangerous." Legolas inclined his head. "Then what would you have us do, my lord? The shards may yet remain, hidden in the ruins of Isengard or scattered across the wild." "We cannot hunt shadows," Faramir said softly, "but we can guard against them. The king is abroad upon the northern roads, seeking to heal what war has broken. I will send word to him at once. As for you, you have done Gondor a service beyond measure. Rest now, for you have ridden long and far." He smiled faintly, though his eyes lingered upon the horizon. "Yet I would not have it said that the elf and the dwarf found only strife in our land. There is peace to be seen still, if one knows where to look." And so they remained in Osgiliath for a time. Days passed quietly. The men worked among the ruins, raising walls where once there was only rubble, and the air filled with the ring of hammers instead of war cries. Legolas wandered often by the riverbank, watching the willows tremble in the wind. Gimli, for his part, offered his knowledge of stone to the builders, and soon his laughter was heard echoing among the half-built halls. Yet even in peace, unease stirred. At night, when the moon rose above the broken arches, Legolas would stand upon the city's edge and listen. Once, in the deep of night, he heard it again, faint and far, like wind through hollow places. A whisper, almost forgotten, yet sharp enough to chill the blood. The voice remembers. He turned sharply, bow in hand, but there was nothing, only the soft murmur of the river. When he spoke of it to Faramir the next day, the steward frowned. "I have heard strange dreams among my men," he said. "They speak of whispers in the dark, calling them by name. Perhaps it is only weariness, or perhaps the echo you destroyed has left its mark upon the hearts of all who heard it." Legolas's gaze grew distant. Echoes are not easily silenced. Sound dies, yet the air remembers its passing. That evening, they gathered upon the great bridge of Osgiliath, where the sunset burned crimson across the water. The workmen had paused to watch, and for a brief moment the city seemed alive again, its broken stones golden in the fading light. Gimli stood beside Legolas, arms crossed, his beard bright in the glow. "You brood too much, Master Elf," he said. "The world will always have its shadows, but it's no use chasing them. Better to build walls that hold than to fear voices on the wind." Legolas smiled faintly. "Perhaps you are right. Yet even walls cannot keep the wind from whispering." They fell silent, watching as the sun sank beyond the mountains. When at last the stars came forth, Faramir joined them. "The king will soon return," he said. "When he comes, we will decide what is to be done. But for tonight, rest easy. The city sleeps under guard, and the river keeps its watch." So they did. But deep in the night, a tremor passed through the earth, so slight that none felt it save Legolas. He woke and listened, his hand upon the stone. From far away, beyond the Efelduath, came a faint vibration, as though something vast had stirred beneath the ground. He rose and went to the window. The sky above Mordor was dark, but upon its rim a flicker of pale light glimmered once, then vanished. "The shadow moves again," he whispered, and though he said nothing to the others, his heart foreknew that the voice was not dead. only waiting. For in the deep places of the world, where stone remembers every sound, the whisper of Saruman's will still lingered, thin as a thread, patient as time. When dawn came, the city awoke to bird song and sunlight, unaware that far beneath the mountains a faint hum had begun, a sound like the stirring of wind in hollow stone, building slowly, as if the world itself were drawing breath once more. The days that followed were bright and calm, yet beneath their peace ran a current of unease, subtle but unrelenting. In the city of Osgiliath, the sound of hammers and chisels echoed through the ruins, and laughter returned to halls that had long known only war. Yet even amid this labor of renewal, some nights were troubled. Soldiers woke trembling from dreams they could not recall, and the wind at dusk carried whispers too soft for mortal tongues to catch. Legolas lingered often upon the river's edge. The waters of the Anduin flowed broad and deep, glinting with sunlight by day and moonlight by night. To the men who rebuilt the city, it was a comfort, a sign of life unbroken. But to the elf, who could hear what others could not, the murmur of the river held dissonance. Its song faltered, as though a discordant voice had joined it beneath the surface. One evening, as the sun sank red behind the white mountains, Gimli came to stand beside him. The dwarf was splattered with dust and mortar, his beard braided against the heat of the day. "You've stood staring at that river every night since we came," he said, half in jest. "Have you grown weary of solid ground?" Legolas's gaze did not shift from the flowing water. "It speaks, Gimli. All things that live have song, even rivers. But this one has learned a new note since the fortress fell." "Bah," Gimli grunted. "I'll take the word of stone over water any day. Stone remembers what is built upon it. Water remembers nothing but its own way down. Yet sometimes," said Legolas softly, "even stone listens when water whispers." The dwarf frowned, sensing a weight behind the elf's words. But before he could answer, a horn sounded from the city's western wall. One long note, low and tremulous. Mardil came running across the bridge toward them, his cloak streaming in the wind. "Riders from the north," he called. "They bear the banner of the king." They hurried through the winding streets, and soon the company gathered at the gate where the stone road climbed toward the hills. There, amid a host of guards, rode King Elessar, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, crowned of Gondor and Arnor alike. His hair was streaked with silver, yet his bearing was as steadfast as in the days of war. When he beheld Legolas and Gimli among the crowd, a smile lit his face. "It gladdens me to find my old companions once more at my side," he said as he dismounted. But Mardil's message spoke of troubling things. "Tell me all." They brought him to the great hall, still under repair, where a long table had been laid with maps and scrolls. Faramir was there already, and the captains of Ithilien beside him. The torches flickered upon the walls as Legolas spoke, recounting all that had passed, the pursuit of the orcs, the shards of crystal, the voice that had haunted the ruins, and the pale flame that would not die. When the tale was ended, silence fell. The king leaned upon the table, his eyes shadowed. "Saruman's craft was deep," he said at last, "and his ambition deeper still. If his voice lingers yet in stone and air, then we must act swiftly before it gathers power once more." Faramir nodded. "There are old places in the realm that remain unguarded. Ruins of the watchtowers, mines long closed. If such shards lie hidden, they could be reawakened." Gimli struck the table with his fist. "Then let us unearth them. I've no fear of dark tunnels, and if these shards are of stone, my axe will see them shattered." Aragorn smiled slightly. "Your courage does you honor, Gimli. But this task must be done with care. These relics may hold sorcery that neither axe nor fire can easily undo. We will send word to the north, to Rivendell, to Erebor, and to the Shire. The Free Peoples must know of this. He turned to Legolas. And you, my friend, what counsel do you give? The elf hesitated, his eyes far away. I have heard the whisper still, my lord. The voice seeks not to command now, but to call. It is wounded, not slain. If it finds another who listens, another of will and pride, it will rise again. There is one place where its echo will seek refuge, the Tower of Orthanc. The stone there was its cradle. If any spark remains, it will return to that place. A murmur passed among the captains. Faramir frowned. Orthanc stands empty, though its gates are sealed. None dwell in Isengard now. None need dwell there, said Legolas. The stones themselves remember him. They are waiting. Aragorn's face hardened. Then I will ride to Isengard. If any evil lingers there, it must be purged before it takes root. But I would not have you bear this burden alone, Legolas. The road is long, and danger may stir again. You shall not ride without me, said Gimli at once. If the elf must chase whispers into the ruin of a wizard's tower, I'll be there to make sure he doesn't drift away on the wind. A flicker of amusement passed through the king's weary eyes. Then it is settled. 3 once more, as it was in the days of war. We ride at dawn. That night, beneath a sky of stars, Legolas walked alone upon the riverbank. The waters glowed faintly in the moonlight, silver and calm. Yet when he bent close, he thought he saw faces in their reflection. Fleeting, sorrowful, gone in an instant. The sound that rose from the river was not wind, but a whisper, faint as a breath. He closed his eyes. You cannot charm me, he murmured. Your words are ash. But the whisper answered, soft and sly. You broke the stone, yet you carry the song. It lingers in you, elf of the wood. You heard it and understood. Legolas drew a sharp breath and stepped back. The voice was not loud, but it pierced the stillness like a blade of glass. Begone, he said. Your master is fallen. There came no reply, only the sigh of the river. But the elf's heart was troubled. For a moment, he had heard not the echo of Saruman, but something older, a tone that resonated deeper, colder, as if the mountain roots themselves had spoken. When dawn came, the 3 companions set forth, Aragorn upon his great steed, Rohirrim, Gimli on a sturdy pony, and Legolas light upon his own swift mount. The soldiers gathered to see them off, and Faramir gave them blessings of safe passage. They rode north through the rolling plains of Anorion, past fields where farmers toiled and children watched with wondering eyes. The wind carried the scent of the sea, and larks sang above the grass. Yet the shadow in Legolas's heart did not lift. At night they camped upon the open plain beneath a sky scattered with stars. Aragorn sat by the fire, mending his sword belt, while Gimli roasted a hare he had snared along the way. Legolas wandered a little apart, his gaze turned toward the dark outline of the mountains. Orthanc waits, he said quietly, and whatever sleeps within it dreams still. Aragorn lifted his eyes from the fire. Then we shall wake it, and end that dream forever. The flames flickered, casting long shapes across the grass. Beyond their circle of light, the wind whispered through the plain, carrying with it a faint sound that might have been laughter. Distant, fading, but not yet gone. And in that moment, though none spoke of it, each knew that their road led not merely to Isengard, but to the heart of an old power that refused to die, a remnant of pride and cunning that even ruin could not wholly silence. The voice remembered, and it waited. The wind rose cold and clear from the mountains as the three companions rode northward, following the long road that wound toward Isengard. The land of Rohan lay quiet beneath the early spring sun, its wide plains shimmering with gold and green. Once, this had been a realm beset by fire and sword. Now the fields were rich again, and the smoke that rose upon the horizon came from the forges and homes of free men, not from the ruin of war. Yet for all its beauty, a silence clung to the air that none of them could name. Even the song of the larks seemed distant. As they rode, Legolas turned often to the east, where the shadow of the misty mountains cut dark against the sky. "Strange," said Gimli at last, breaking the long quiet. "I had thought my heart would be glad to see these lands again, yet I feel as if unseen eyes follow us." "They do," replied Legolas softly, "but not of flesh. The land itself remembers us. It knows where we go." Aragorn rode a little ahead, his cloak stirring in the wind. "Perhaps it is the memory of war that lingers," he said. "Many fell along this road. Ghosts of battle take long to fade." "Battle or no," grumbled Gimli, "I'll take open plains over haunted woods any day. Still, I like this knot. The grass whispers as though it speaks in tongues." That night they camped beside the river Isen. Its waters ran swift and silver, gliding over smooth stones. The sky above was clear, and the stars shone bright and cold. Gimli built a small fire, and the three sat close around it, the warmth chasing away the chill. For a while they spoke little. Then Legolas lifted his head, his sharp ears catching a faint sound beyond the river's flow. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. Aragorn rose at once, hand upon his sword. The night was still, save for the steady rush of water. Yet then it came again, a low, distant hum, soft as breath, but filled with strange rhythm, as though the earth itself murmured. Gimli frowned. "A tremor? Or something moving beneath?" "No," said Legolas, his voice tense. "It is not movement, but song." They listened, and the sound swelled. A deep tone that seemed to rise from the roots of the hills. It was neither voice nor instrument, yet it bore the cadence of words. Aragorn's face grew grave. "This is no mortal sound. It is the same that stirred when Orthanc still stood in power. The stone calls again." They did not sleep that night. When dawn came, pale and colorless, they crossed the river and pressed on. The plains narrowed as they neared the gap of Rohan, and the land grew barren and stony. Before them loomed the ring of Isengard, a vast circle of ancient walls and towers, now broken and overgrown. At its heart, still black and gleaming even beneath the sun, stood Orthanc, the indestructible pillar of Saruman's craft. The waters of the Isen pooled about its base, reflecting its dark sides like a mirror. Trees had begun to grow again in the ring, their roots weaving through stone and soil. Birds nested in the cracks of the old walls, and wildflowers crept where once there had been only iron and ash. Yet, as they entered the ring, all sound fell away. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of earth and metal. Even the horses grew restless. "Here," said Aragorn quietly. "We will leave the mounts. They will not tread nearer." They advanced on foot, their steps echoing faintly. The wind had died, and no leaf stirred. Orthanc rose above them, black as obsidian, its 4 sharp peaks catching the light. Legolas stopped first. His keen eyes had caught something glimmering upon the ground, a fragment of white crystal, no larger than a coin. He knelt and lifted it, turning it in his fingers. The shard pulsed faintly, as though alive. "It seems one of the lost pieces has found its way home," he said. Gimli peered over his shoulder. Then best you drop it before it sings again." But even as he spoke, a faint vibration trembled through the earth. The shard in Legolas's hand grew warm, and a light stirred deep within Orthunk's walls, dim at first, then rising like the glow of embers beneath ash. Aragorn drew his sword. "Back," he commanded. "The tower wakes." The ground shuddered, dust falling from the cliffs above. From within the tower came a sound, the same low hum they had heard by the river, now deepened into a note that made the very air quiver. Legolas dropped the shard, but it did not fall. It hung in mid-air, spinning slowly, the light around it brightening until it flared white. The reflection of the flame shone upon the wet stone of Orthanc, and the black surface rippled like water. Then came a voice, faint, cold, and terrible in its calm. "Did you think the voice of reason could die? I was the word that shaped stone, the thought that bent will. I was order made flesh, and you have left the world to chaos." It was Saruman's tone, or what remained of it. Not the full might of his persuasion, but the dry, pitiless reason that once had beguiled kings. Aragorn's hand tightened on his hilt. "You were a servant of the Vorla, turned to pride and ruin. There is no place for you in this age." "Servant?" The word echoed like laughter. "I was wisdom unbound. You cannot silence what was learned. Every thought of mastery, every whisper of control, all bear my mark." The light flared, striking the tower's base. The water about Orthanc boiled and hissed. Legolas raised his bow, his voice clear. "You are nothing but echo and vanity. Your song has ended." He loosed an arrow tipped with silver from the forges of the woodland realm. It struck the hovering shard, shattering it with a sound like breaking glass. The voice screamed, not aloud, but in their minds. The tower quaked, fissures racing across its surface like veins of fire. Steam burst from the ground, and the air filled with blinding light. "Run!" cried Aragorn. They fled across the ring, the roar behind them rising to a thunderous crescendo. The very stones split apart, and a column of white flame shot upward, piercing the clouds. For a moment, Orthanc shone like a beacon, then dimmed and darkened. The light withdrew into the earth with a final sigh, and all was still. When the smoke cleared, the tower stood unchanged, black, silent, and unbroken. But its glow was gone, its shadow faded. Gimli sat upon a fallen stone, panting. "If that was but an echo," he said, "I'll have no wish to hear the real song." Aragorn sheathed his sword slowly. "It is ended. What lingered of Saruman's pride is spent. The stones of Orthanc are clean again." Legolas gazed long upon the dark tower, his eyes filled with a strange sorrow. Clean, perhaps, but not empty. Some voices never truly die. They sink into the roots of the world, waiting for ears to hear them anew. The king laid a hand upon his shoulder. "Then let the memory of this place be our warning. Pride and wisdom, bound together, make peril beyond reckoning." They turned at last from Isengard, leaving it to the silence of the mountains and the slow return of the wild. The wind came again, cool and pure, carrying the scent of rain. As they rode southward, the plains opened before them, bright beneath the afternoon sun. Yet far behind, upon the crown of Orthanc, a single white gull circled once, crying, and for an instant, as its wings caught the light, a faint echo trembled in the air, like the last note of a forgotten song. Then it was gone, and the long shadow of Saruman passed from Middle-earth at last. The shadow of Isengard faded behind them as they rode, and the sunlight of Rohan spread wide before their eyes. The wind swept through the tall grasses like waves upon a golden sea, carrying the scent of wild thyme and heather. though peace lay heavy upon the land, the hearts of the three companions were quiet, burdened still with the memory of what they had seen in the Tower of Orthanc. For many leagues they rode without speaking. Gimli's pony trudged faithfully behind Aragorn's steed, its short legs keeping steady pace, while Legolas rode ahead, his keen gaze upon the horizon. The elf's mind wandered far from the road, to the sound that had shaken the tower, to the cold voice that had spoken reason turned to madness. It was gone now, burned into silence, yet he felt it linger faintly, like a note that hums in the air, long after the harp string has been plucked. As the day waned, they reached the green hills near the Entwash, where the plains rolled up toward Fangorn Forest. The wood loomed vast and ancient, its trees dark against the falling sun. Here, long ago, they had once met Treebeard, the eldest of living things. Legolas felt a strange pull toward that shadowed realm, half memory, half yearning. At the foot of the hills they halted to make camp. The air was cool, and the stars began to kindle, bright and clear above the plains. Gimli struck flint to steel, and soon had a fire crackling merrily, while Aragorn unpacked dried meat and bread from his saddlebags. "It seems strange," said the king as he sat beside the flames, "to rest again upon this road after all these years. The world has changed since we last passed this way, yet still it feels as though something waits here, unseen, unfinished." "Aye," said Gimli, chewing thoughtfully. "And not only in these lands. I'll swear by my beard that the earth itself has not forgotten the voice that once ruled here. Even the stones of Orthanc trembled with memory." Legolas nodded. "The stone remembers, and so does the air. Evil has been broken, but its echo will not fade until the song of the world itself changes. Time alone can do that." Aragorn stirred the fire with a stick, sending up a small shower of sparks. "Then let time do its work. We have done what we could. The last remnant of Saruman's will is ended. Let the wind cleanse what remains." But though his words were steady, there was weariness in his voice, and Legolas perceived it. The king had borne many burdens, of crown, of war, of the long healing of his realm. Yet he did not complain, nor would he turn aside from what duty demanded. They slept beneath the open stars that night. Legolas alone remained wakeful, for elves need little rest, and his thoughts wandered far. The forest of Fangorn whispered beyond the plain, and now and then he fancied he heard deep voices murmuring in its depths. When dawn came, pale and soft over the plains, they rose and rode once more, turning their path toward the eaves of the forest. As they approached, the air grew thick and cool, and the sound of the wind in the trees became like distant speech. They dismounted and walked among the shadows, the earth soft beneath their feet. Moss hung heavy from the branches, and shafts of sunlight pierced the green roof above like spears of gold. Birds called, and somewhere far off a stream sang over stone. After a time, they came to a clearing, wide and still. In its center stood a great oak, older and broader than any tree of the forest. Its roots coiled like serpents upon the earth, and its bark was gnarled with age. Then from the shade beyond the clearing came a voice, deep as the rolling of distant thunder. So, the wanderers return at last. From the trees stepped Treebeard, the eldest of Ents, taller than any man, his eyes gleaming with green light. His great hands hung like branches, and his beard was a tangle of moss and leaf. Legolas bowed low. "Treebeard, it warms my heart to see you again. We feared you had gone into the deep woods and would not return." "Whom?" said Treebeard, bending low to peer at them. "Not yet. There is still much to watch. though the world grows quieter. You bring tidings upon the wind, Legolas Greenleaf, and they are not gentle. Aragorn stepped forward. You know, then? I feel it, rumbled the Ent. The earth trembled not long ago, a shaking deep in its roots. The stones sang in pain. That is the mark of wizardry old and proud. Saruman's touch lingers even in death. Gimli crossed his arms. We have broken what remained of him. The tower of Orthanc is silent now. Treebeard's eyes half closed, and a sound like the sigh of ancient boughs passed through him. Silent, perhaps, but nothing born of spirit is truly gone. Even Saruman's malice has seeped into the soil. The trees remember his voice, though they would sooner forget. It may lie quiet for long years, sleeping under the grass, until some other tongue stirs it to life again. Legolas looked upon the forest around them, vast, green and whispering. Then the duty falls to us, to keep that day from coming. Aye, said the Ent slowly. Keep watch, but do not despair. The world is old, and darkness has risen and fallen many times. You cannot silence the shadow, but you can choose not to heed it. That is the greater wisdom. They spoke long with Treebeard through the day. He told them of how the Ents had withdrawn farther into the wild, of how the young trees had grown tall where Saruman's pits once smoked, and how the birds and beasts had returned to dwell in peace. When at last the sun began to sink, they made ready to depart. Treebeard walked with them to the edge of the wood, his great stride slow and solemn. Farewell, my friends, he said. You have seen the last breath of the old world and the first dawn of the new. Guard it well. The tongues of men are swift to forget, but the earth does not forgive easily. Aragorn bowed deeply. The world owes you much, shepherd of the forest. May peace root deep and long in your trees. The Ent's laughter was like wind in the high branches. Peace grows slowly, King of Gondor, but it grows. Farewell, Aragorn. Farewell, Legolas Greenleaf and Gimli, son of Gloin. Walk lightly, and remember the trees. They left the forest at twilight, when the first stars shone in the sky. The air was cool, and the plains stretched before them, wide and golden beneath the rising moon. For a time they rode in silence, each lost in thought. At last, Gimli spoke, his voice low but steady. I think I begin to understand the old tree's wisdom. The voice of evil may not die, but we can choose not to answer it. Legolas smiled faintly. Aye, perhaps that is the truest victory. Aragorn looked toward the west, where the distant glow of Edoras flickered on the horizon. The shadow is gone, and yet the memory remains, a reminder to keep watch. But this night, at least, belongs to peace. The wind carried his words away across the grasslands. Above them, the stars burned bright and clear, unmarred by smoke or storm. The three companions rode on beneath their light, bound by friendship and by memory, and behind them the forest of Fangorn sighed softly, a deep, contented breath of the world beginning anew. The road wound gently down from the eaves of Fangorn, curving through the green plains where the grass rippled like water under the morning wind. The land stretched vast and golden before them, crowned by distant hills. The storm that had shadowed their journey was gone. The air was bright and full of quiet strength. Yet a solemn peace lay upon the hearts of the three travelers, for they knew that their long hunt was ended. The shadow of Saruman's deceit, born anew in broken shards and whispered voices, had at last been silenced. Still, each of them felt the echo of that dark melody, faint but real, like the fading toll of a bell long after its last stroke. For many leagues they rode without speech, The sun climbed higher, gleaming upon Aragorn's helm and glinting from the silver clasp of Legolas's cloak. Gimli rode between them, his eyes fixed on the road, his beard stirring in the wind. The clop of hooves and the whisper of the grass were the only sounds, and those seemed fitting, the quiet of an ending that was also a beginning. At length, as the afternoon waned, the fields grew greener, and the smell of earth gave way to that of fresh water. A gentle stream crossed their path, flowing westward toward the Entwash. They halted there to rest, and while Aragorn tended the horses, Legolas knelt by the water's edge. The stream ran clear, and its song was light, unmarred by the deep, discordant tones he had heard before. "The land is healing," he said softly. "Even the waters here have forgotten the voice that troubled them." Gimli splashed his hands into the stream and drank deeply. "Aye, and may it stay that way. I'm glad to leave behind all that whispering and wailing. I'll take a river's honest murmur over a wizard's talk any day." Aragorn smiled faintly. And yet it was that very murmur that warned us. Had the river not spoken, the echo might still have lingered. The world itself has a voice, though few are wise enough to hear it. Legolas rose, his keen eyes turned westward. "The trees will remember," he said. "They always do. They will guard what we have restored." The king nodded. "And men must do the same. Evil does not die in a day. It sleeps, waiting for those who listen to its promises. Let that be our warning, and our charge." They mounted again, and rode until the sun sank low, and at last the green hill of Edoras came into view, standing proud beneath the shadow of the white mountains. The golden roof of Meduseld caught the dying light, and its beams shone as though crowned with flame. A trumpet sounded faint and clear from the heights, and riders came swiftly down to meet them. When the guards recognized the standard of the King of Gondor, they bowed low, and the travelers were led up the winding road to the great hall of the Mark. Within, the hearths burned bright, and the banners of Rohan stirred in the rising wind. Queen Éowyn herself came forth to greet them, her beauty grave and radiant as the dawn. She welcomed Aragorn as brother king, and embraced Legolas and Gimli as old friends. "Long years have passed since last you came to this hall," she said, "and though the world has mended, there are still shadows to be named, and fears to be laid to rest." "Those shadows are spent," Aragorn answered. "The voice that haunted the ruins of Isengard is broken. The White Hand will rise no more." She studied him a moment, as though weighing the truth of his words. Then she smiled, though there was sadness in it. "So one chapter ends, and another begins. The age of wizards is truly over." They feasted that night in Meduseld. The air was filled with song, the clear voices of the Rohirrim mingling with the deep laughter of Gimli and the soft speech of elves. Mead flowed freely, and for a time the memory of war and shadow seemed distant. Yet later, when the fire had burned low and the hall was quiet, Aragorn and Legolas stood together upon the high terrace that overlooked the plains. Stars shone in the great sky, and the wind carried the faint scent of grass and mountain snow. "Do you remember," said Aragorn, "the night before Helm's Deep, when we stood upon these same fields and waited for dawn? We spoke then of hope and of the long road ahead. I did not know that the road would lead us so far, nor that we would still walk it after peace was won." Legolas turned his gaze toward the west, where the horizon faded into starlit shadow. "Peace is but another road," he said. "It must be walked with the same courage as war. Shadows will come again, though they may take other shapes. But while hearts remember light, darkness will never prevail." "And will you remain in these lands?" Aragorn asked. The elf was silent for a time. For a while. The world still holds music yet unplayed, and I would hear it before I go. But the sea calls even now. When its song grows too strong to bear, I will heed it. Gimli's voice came from behind them, gruff and warm. If you go, elf, you'll not leave me behind. I've seen enough marvels in this world to know that even the sea won't keep me from one more. Aragorn laughed softly. Then may the Valar bless your voyage when that day comes. But for now, let us keep the world we have saved. The three stood together beneath the stars, bound still by friendship and memory. No longer were they a fellowship of war, but of peace, guardians of what had been purchased by the blood and courage of many. When morning came, they departed from Edoras. The people of Rohan lined the road, cheering as they passed, though few knew the full weight of what had been done. The wind caught the banners above Meduseld, and they streamed bright against the blue sky. At the fords of the Entwash, the travelers parted ways. Aragorn turned south toward Gondor, to his city of stone and white towers. Legolas and Gimli took the road east toward the forests of Ithilien, where the elves' people now tended the growing wood. There, among the green hills and bright waterfalls, they found rest. The trees of Ithilien thrived under their care, and laughter once more filled the glades. Men came to call it the Garden of the King, and songs were sung of the elf and the dwarf who dwelt there, companions unlike any other, whose friendship had outlasted war, sorrow, and time. Years passed, and the world changed. The Fourth Age deepened, and the memory of the great wars grew dim among men. Yet in the quiet corners of Middle-earth, the old tales endured. Travelers spoke of a fair land where light never faded, where two companions walked beneath green boughs, speaking softly of days gone by and of friends long departed. And in the far west, where the sea met the sky, gulls cried over empty shores, and the wind bore faint echoes of another song, the song of the elder days, calling one of the last of the Eldar home. When at last Legolas sailed into the west, the dwarf went with him, for neither would be parted from the other in life or memory. And so they passed beyond the circles of the world, leaving behind the fields they had walked and the kingdoms they had helped to save. But in the hearts of those who remembered them, their deeds lived on. The shadow had fallen, the echo had faded, yet the light remained, quiet, steadfast, and undying, like the stars that shone over Middle-earth when the First Age began, and would shine still when all ages were.